Hi everyone, welcome to today's Tech23 Circle. I'm your Circle leader, Matt Salier, and Rachel and the team at Tech23 will get us started in a second.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Hello, and welcome to the Tech23 Impact Circles. Thank you for that. It's really wonderful to have all of you joining us for what's sure to be a great conversation exploring building cyber resilience in small and medium enterprises. As is custom, I would first like to acknowledge both the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and the Bunwurrung and Woiwurrung Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land where the Slattery's team works, meets and creates. We pay our respects to the elders both past, present and emerging. We also acknowledge that there are people attending today from other traditional lands and nations, and we extend our respects to their custodians, ancestors, elders and future leaders. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Nice to see you here, Rachel.
Hello, Adina, and I'm very excited about this circle. I want to thank everyone for zooming in today from wherever they might be, and especially welcome and thank the contributors. Hello, Mike, Matt, Jacqui, Walkira, and of course, Matt, who is leading today's wonderful conversation. One of the best things about zooming in is the opportunity to meet people from across the country. So please say hello on the chat and tell us where you're zooming in from. Tech23 is all about amplifying the people and the organisations chipping away at some of the biggest challenges we face. So coming to you any which way, we've had lots of Tech23 circles so far, and the recordings are available on the website for quantum and medtech and nuclear medicine and lots of things, and more are on their way. So please check out the website and see what else you might want to attend. We've also, for those lucky enough to be in Sydney, we've got the long lunch happening on the 10th of December. So please consider attending that too. None of this could be possible without the generous support of all of our sponsors and supporters. So I just want to call out Oz Industry, UNSW, Main Sequence with CSIRO, New South Wales Government, Macquarie University, Addison's, ANSTO and Cicada Innovations. Again, a warm welcome to everyone on the line. How you want to run these circles is really up to you. So join in on the chat, join in on the board. And if you want to hang around afterwards and break into sort of smaller discussions, that's welcomed too. After Matt shares, we'll be, as I said, giving you the opportunity to ask your own questions. So please enjoy today's circle. Adina, back to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Now, as Rachel mentioned, just a couple of housekeeping items for you. You would have seen in your reminder, and now just popping into the Zoom chat, there is a link to the Slattery's Community Charter, which is a great read if you need guidance on the behaviour that's encouraged at the circles. Now, just to reconfirm the running order today, we'll be starting with Matt and the contributors kicking off the conversation, followed by audience Q&A from you. So please do chuck them into the chat or put your hand up if you'd like to ask one directly. And then ending with randomized deep dive breakout rooms. Now, we are using a shared mural board, which is a visual asset to capture your thoughts, which we will share in the chat as well. So please feel free to add whatever you like to this board. Squiggles or stickies are all welcome. We will be recording this presentation for your information, and we'll make it available post-event so you can revisit later on. Now, as Rachel mentioned, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to every one of the Circle contributors, all of the Tech23 sponsors and supporters for helping to make this Deep Tech Festival happen. And we also want to thank all of you for dialing in to join us. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Matt. Thank you, Matt. Thanks,
Adina. Thanks, Rachel. And awesome work to you guys to pivot as the word of the year to Tech23 in such a dynamic and virtual way. I'd too like to pay my respects with acknowledgement to country to acknowledge the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups for the Eastern Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands that I sit today and RMIT University is based, and all the First Nations people that you find yourselves on the land of today. In this time when our Willem, our camp or meeting place is so distributed across so many places, I hope we all feel a strong sense of Noogle, which is belonging in meeting here today. I respectfully acknowledge the ancestors, elders, past, present, and emerging. Ngunjin, thank you. So welcome. I've got an awesome panel today, and I just thought I'd set the scene at the start before I throw the guys and put them in the deep end. But it's really an understatement to say that the COVID pandemic has seen an increase in the rapid digitisation of our economy. Yeah, as all businesses transform, we know that security will become increasingly important. And for a large number of organisations, SMEs are particularly vulnerable. You know, there's a bunch of reports that have come out over the last little while, including the national strategy. But in recent months, private businesses have shown that cybersecurity attacks are not limited to one sector or one organisation. Across the board, vulnerability is critically important. And it's estimated the annual losses are somewhere in the middle of $300 million. And that's just reported. One report every 10 minutes to ACSC of a cybercrime. So it's fair to say that the increasing use of technologies, the speed of change, the number of devices we use, the threat surface has never increased at the rate that it is now. And we know that criminals, nation states are looking for opportunities to exploit. And that's just one element of that very important part of cybersecurity resilience. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre, ACSC, had a report recently that showed 60% of small businesses had a cybersecurity incident. And while 80% of these rated these as cybersecurity as very important, they also rated simultaneously their understanding of cybersecurity as average or below average. And that's almost half of the 1,700 businesses surveys, and they indicated they were spending less than $500 a year on cybersecurity. This is a real problem, and cybersecurity resilience is something that we should all be talking about and taking seriously. Welcome to my conversationalists today, Michael, Jacqui, Walkira, and Matt. The two Matts, Matt and I do a few of these things together and it gets confusing, so I'll try and break that out. But Matt, I thought I'd throw to you first. As I just said, you know, COVID's like an accelerant for this digital economy. Why is cybersecurity such an important national concern? And what is it specifically for the SME sectors that it makes us really worried about this?
Well, it's a national concern, Matt, because it impacts everyone. So we saw in the 2020 cybersecurity strategy, you know, the government's put $1.67 billion into protecting Australia's cyber assets. And in this strategy, what they've done is identified the importance of SMEs for Australia. Because in Australia, there's critical systems that we're dependent on. There's systems of national significance that we're dependent on, all of which are underpinned and involve small businesses. So what you're seeing is actually a change in attack strategies where attackers, instead of trying to break into large organizations, try to hack or break into smaller organizations to then gain access to, you know, part of a supply chain with larger organizations or access to information, you know, that those small businesses may hold. But what we've also seen in the COVID situation is certain small SMEs being focused. So in the healthcare sector, we've seen aged facilities being targeted of ransomware attacks. And you think sort of nothing would be as cool, you know, is locking down, you know, and old age care facility at this sort of time of COVID. But this is what the attackers are doing. They've been locking down these centers and saying, well, you know, if you want to release your system or data, pay this fee. And this is in the midst of a pandemic. So if anything, the pandemic, because people are more working from home, has attracted more online attackers, because again, it shows our reliance on the technology and also the resilience of that technology. Because you know, if technology fails, it impacts everyone. You know, it's reported on the news when Zoom has an issue or when Microsoft Teams has an issue, because we're now dependent on these sort of global systems. One attack can impact everyone in Australia and globally as well.
And I mean, I was startled by that stat that out of the 1,700 businesses that ACSC surveyed, you know, nearly 50% spent $500 or less on cybersecurity. And so, you know, Jacqui, this is something Cynch Security does a lot of work in. What do you think that tells us about the appetite for or the understanding of what small to medium enterprises need to be focused on? What are you seeing at Cynch with the programs that you provide?
So we're seeing that a lot of these small businesses, they know that it's important. They know that they want to invest some money in it. But a lot of the time, if you think about a small business, they're very busy trying to get their business up and running. That's their first priority. And especially during this COVID time, they're having to try and pivot some of their business. So traditionally, a lot of them may have been like a face-to-face type business. They've had to move that digital. And so they've been focusing on trying to get their business up and running and operating. So a lot of them, although they feel that this is really important, a lot of the time they just don't have the capacity to be able to prioritize it. And when we see that a lot of the information that's out there is in a really complicated kind of language, and that they don't know exactly what they need to do as the first thing, a lot of the time it makes it really hard for them to work out, okay, this is the first thing I need to do, and this is the first thing I need to invest, as opposed to let's buy a whole lot of different technology. Is this going to solve my problem?
And Mike, I guess that's I guess that leads us on to what your sense of that resilience factor in the SME sector is. The Tide is very involved in both the education, but also building out that product suite. What do you see is working and what isn't? What's you look at the Essential 8, and I think there's a really good grounding there for people to start logically working through action, but clearly there's a disconnect between prioritization or whatever. What would you observe there?
Yeah, there's a number of factors at play. There's the obviously remote workforce situation has kind of accelerated adoption of a whole range of new technologies, and the best practice cybersecurity is typically not user friendly, and that means that those that aren't tech savvy or vulnerable groups like elderly or young people who don't kind of consider the factors involved are vulnerable, and that leaves systems exposed. The other thing that we're seeing is things like identity theft is a risk, but digital assets or digital systems themselves are becoming much more valuable. So it's attracting more sophisticated attackers and a greater volume of attacks, and means that there's not really one product that can secure an organization anymore, because there's so many different attack surfaces. So kind of seeing a situation of going from head buried in the sand as a small business to deer in headlights.
Yeah, and that this inundation of information, all of which is complex and difficult to work through. And obviously government has a really significant role to play here with the federal strategy dropping in August, and Matt already mentioned $1.6 billion committed there, and Andy Penn's industry advisory group's report just shortly before that. If we think about government policy, are we getting the levers right to focus on SMEs? And Walkira, I was keen to get your sense. AustCyber is playing a really pivotal role in the growth of that sector. What are you seeing about, are we getting the levers right? Are we starting to address some of the things that Jacqui and Mike have mentioned there?
Yeah, so AustCyber, as you're saying, is always advocating and working with the government to find ways in which to create and policies and support the industry. For example, we are just going to launch on next Monday, our next SCP with a webinar in which we are going to provide a roadmap with specific areas where the government needs to invest more to support Australia's cyber sovereign capability, hence increasing the resilience for the whole Australia. And these are some of the things that the government are doing. Of course, there's always so much that can be done and that should be done, but the resources are limited. As the small medium enterprises know, you need to decide on where to put your resources. And we have seen how the government has raised the awareness thanks to those strategies being launched, and also when they put out there that Australia has been attacked, it's been under attack. So I think that leadership makes a lot of a difference, because after that, we've seen everyone talking about it, which was something that didn't occur before.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I totally agree. Those nefarious actors, endeavouring to influence government systems or critical infrastructure. But I think there's also a discussion, isn't there, about critical infrastructure is now so much a much broader definition. You know, if SMEs are the engine room of the economy, that's part of our critical infrastructure. So how do we get the balance right of where those efforts go? Clearly, there's a huge issue if 1 in 5 SME managers don't even know what the word phishing means. So I don't know, Matt, what do you think? How do we get that connection right between what's attacks on, I don't know, ANU and research from foreign actors down to a spear phishing attack for a small business on the main street? How do we get the balance right? What could we do better? I think we've lost your audio there, Matt.
Oh, it helps if I turn it on.
So t-shirt that's got you're on mute. I've been
So certainly with the 2020 cybersecurity strategy, what it's doing is taking a whole of nation perspective. So it actually does talk about government, it talks about academia, it talks about industry, it talks about SMEs, and even cyber safety. And really, that's the approach that has to be taken, is that whole of nation, is that you have to consider all aspects of the economy, including down to individual citizens, because we're seeing citizens becoming more and more of a target of cyber attacks and victims of cyber abuse. And really, that's the only solution that will work, is that whole of nation perspective. And that's why AustCyber, play such a keen role in, their awareness of cyber security, their competitiveness plan in terms of how cybersecurity, underpins all the different sort of components of the Australian economy. If you break it down into different silos and sectors, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and you mentioned an interesting thing there about citizenry-based effort, and Mike, I wondered if you had a comment. Obviously Tide does a lot on privacy and how we perceive that connection between our digital world and our physical world. What are some of the barriers we need to overcome to really embed this understanding of resilience in terms of our digital economy that you've noticed?
So one of the biggest problems we have today is that the organizations themselves are responsible for protecting the sensitive consumer data that they collect, whether that's a government department or just a corporate enterprise or a health platform. And the current approach to cybersecurity is failing us. It's the data breach is inevitable, and expecting a small business or even a well-resourced organization who are also failing to face up against a state actor is just not practical. And so I think the approach to cybersecurity, the approach to protecting that infrastructure needs to be different. And we come from a very different angle to say, to expect that breach and to make sure that when it happens, there's nothing valuable to find.
There's an interesting analogy about things that we all become used to, like fire drills and so on, and the idea of cybersecurity drills. And this is something that isn't in the normal vernacular of a business or even a citizen. Have you seen anything similar or any sort of light poles, lamp posts in global best practice that's starting to look like addressing the problem you've just identified?
We are seeing it. That there's certainly more awareness. I think Cynch could probably speak better to this, from their exposure.
Jacqui, what do you think?
Yeah, so large corporates often they will do that fire drill type thing. When it comes to smaller businesses, the things that we try to encourage them to do is to think about, okay, who's the person that you want to call in the event of an incident? Knowing that phone number as a minimum is really important, because some people don't realize, they don't think about it until something actually happens, and then they're scrambling going, okay, should it be this person that we should contact? And a lot of that panic, like that precious times after an incident has occurred, is so important. So we talk about making sure that you're aware of who you need to contact, and whether or not that person then knows what the next steps kind of are. I think that's the first step in terms of incident response. And a lot of businesses we find don't even have that first phone number. So that is the first step that we really encourage.
I know you're doing a program of work with Department of Home Affairs now, talking to lots of businesses about, what they're doing or what they could be doing. Can you share anything? And I know that I don't think it's completed yet, but can you share sort of any insights that are coming through that are giving you hope and optimism for the levels of resilience to rise, or B, really adding to the concern? Like, where are we on the continuum? What's your sense?
So the ACSC, they released a small business survey a couple of years ago, and within that they asked those small businesses of the ASD top 8, essential 8, which are a whole lot of different controls which is recommended for organizations to implement. Which have you actually implemented? And so we had a pretty good baseline then. The survey that we just completed over the last few months, which Matt was a part of, so that was a joint effort between AustCyber, RMIT, Deakin, and Cynch. We saw that a lot of those had increased in terms of the number. I mean, the sample size obviously is different, the people that replied to this survey. However, we did see that there was a positive increase in some of the people that were implementing some of those essential 8, which shows that there is some awareness and more people doing those controls, which is good. And some of the things that we saw are that they're doing those essential things like, patching, for example. That's something that people are doing, and backups. So obviously those messages that we're trying to get out there are getting out there. And that's a positive, I think.
Well, Walkira, have you sort of seen the same in terms of what AustCyber is seeing across the ecosystem and in the various nodes around the country?
Yes, just at the middle of the year, we released a report called the Digital Trust Report, in which we presented how 4 weeks of disruption in the digital world or economy in Australia could cost $30 billion, or 1.5% of the GDP of Australia losses. That's 163,000 million jobs. And if you compare it with even it's like 40% of your health budget, So just a month of disruption could cause that. And we presented that, and as Jacqui was saying, one of the first thing and the best thing that you can do as a small business, because that's my background, I come from small businesses, is talk to your employees, is get aware of what things are out there to support you, what things can you do. And it is daunting for a business owner that without a technical background is very daunting. Even the language is daunting, but believe me, because I've been in your position, that just going out there and finding little things that you can change, you can do. And even if something actually happens, what can I do after that? As Jacqui was saying, and telling that to your employees makes a huge difference.
Matt, I know that's an area that you focus on a lot, the human factors in building up cyber resilience and cyber capability. What are some of the best practices in terms of nudging behavior in the right way? It sounds promising, Jacqui's observation that the metrics on average seem to be heading in the right direction, but what would you comment on that in terms of the human side?
Well, certainly, and it's been touched upon before, a lot of the problem in the cyber space is a lot of the advice that's given from governments is very technical in content. So again, which immediately alienates people. So again, in terms of the SME space, you've got a situation where people may not have the awareness of the technology. It may not be their primary skill base in terms of having expertise. So I think a key area is, making information accessible and available for small businesses that describes what cybersecurity is in an easy to understand format. You've also got the issue that we talk about SMEs. There's actually a big world of difference, because SMEs is small to medium-sized enterprise. There's a world of difference between a medium-sized enterprise that has hundreds of employees versus a small or micro organization that just has one or two. And I think this is also part of the problem. The advice is given to these wide remit of organizations, but yet it doesn't relate to all sizes of small, medium, micro organizations. And I think that really has to be something that has to be understood, that it isn't just one block of SMEs. There's actually different parts of SMEs that have different needs, different requirements, different budgets, different resources.
Yeah, look, and I think and encourage everyone on the call to throw your questions in to us as well. I guess it's an interesting point, Matt. That, we often talk about the skills shortage, and that's around cybersecurity professionals, those people that a medium or a large enterprise can employ to protect their business. But really, the skills shortage is far more dramatic than the gap that's identified, because actually we need every general manager, every operations person to have a level of acuity or fidelity with that. So, maybe Mike, what do you think about that? There's so much discussion about the cybersecurity professionals and the need for more. How do we break down that to demonstrate the skills gap more broadly across the economy?
I guess our philosophy, our approach is to accept that we are not going to be able to assume that end users through to platform operators, even developers building the CRMs and the practice management software that SMEs use, are going to be cybersecurity experts and are going to have access to that expertise. So having concepts like security and privacy by design built into the platforms that SMEs use, so that aspect of, my e-commerce platform, this is the e-commerce platform I use, or I'm a law firm, this is the practice management software I use, and removing the responsibility or the reliance on the end user having access to that knowledge or following the right procedures. I think that's probably something that can amplify security better than trying to fill a gap in knowledge.
It's a confidence thing, isn't it, though? It's a confidence for a small micro business owner to know what to ask for or to know what to look for. Like, how do we change that equation? If we go back to the core of resilience, how do we change that dynamic, that it's complicated and perhaps overly technical?
Well, I think actually a lot of the work that AustCyber are doing today is going a long way towards that. Even just the prominence that they have now, and the conversations that they start is raising that awareness, so that business owners know to ask the question and realize that, hey, we need someone with that expertise. We don't have that in-house. We're not going to have it in-house. We need to seek that advice. We need to skill up ourselves in order to be able to, in order to ultimately know that we need someone else to help us here.
Well, Walkira, how do you think that effort to sort of demystify, reduce complexity, increase self-efficacy is going? You're feeling like that's on the right path, as Michael indicates?
So I started just this year in cybersecurity, and I was working before with just entrepreneurs from any other technology but cybersecurity. And I could tell just the difference that I can see in just these few months from, as I said at the beginning, when the government actually put it out there as a leader, how things started to change and how people started to talk about it. And also with businesses, with the small businesses. And yes, as Mike was saying, AustCyber is doing a really, really good job with that cybersecurity by design. We are currently working with a program with investors. So for example, usually companies go to the investors to be able to scale their technologies. So we are trying to tell investors, don't put in there that they need to have a secure by design application if you're going to give them the money. So in that way, what Mike is talking about will be able to happen, that at the end user will be protected since the beginning. And that will be a great achievement. And that has been one of AustCyber's objectives for this year, to launch the program. So we are currently working in something like that.
Yeah, Jacqui, I wonder, is that the same experience for you? Are you seeing that a bit more confidence, a bit more awareness of some of the more complex terms being being something small and micro businesses, to Matt's point, are happy to grapple with more than they were before?
So in our platform, we use really plain language. We try and make it really simple for people to understand, because normally the terminology is quite complex and sometimes the concepts are quite difficult for somebody that doesn't have an IT background. Initiatives such as, making sure that application is secure by design will definitely help, because a lot of these small businesses, they use the software. They don't have big teams like corporates do. Having a look at software bugs, making sure that the software is secure. So that is going to go a long way, but helping those small businesses. But obviously, a lot of small businesses also need to do some work as well, because that's not foolproof. There will be always bugs, unfortunately. There will always be, someone that's going to try and find a way in. But by keeping, the software secure from the beginning, you've already lifted the bar that is pretty low at the moment.
but on the right track, and I guess
on the right track,
yeah. And so, Matt, I wonder whether, or for everyone on the panel, I suppose, is what's the first two things that I think we said before, knowing who to call when something does happen, because it will. But what are the first two or three things for any small and micro business owners that are on the call? What's something you should have locked and loaded in your operating model of your business right now?
Well, I think that there's a number of things. I think certainly, looking at the essential 8s to identify, that they comply with that. So they have patching, that they have some of the suggestions that they're using some sort of backup system. Doesn't have to be complex, cloud-based. They're using multi-factor authentication. So, when they log in, they also get a text message to enter that text in. So it means if their account's compromised, without that second level of authentication, no one can compromise. So there's actually a lot of very simple things organizations can do that, not at great cost, but they don't do that because they're not aware that they should do it. And I think this comes back to the awareness issue, is that there's a lot of information out there, a lot of resources, but how do you then make SMEs aware of it? I think this is the problem of SMEs, is because SMEs don't sit in a block called SMEs. They're actually embedded in all these different industrial sectors. So how do you get that message to SMEs? And I think that's actually the complex issue, which is why the government in their cybersecurity strategy talked about involving things like chambers of commerce, and professional organizations to get that message about cybersecurity to SMEs.
And are you seeing any of that, or any chambers or any industry organisations that are more proactive than others? I know that a number of the banks work with their SME customers on cyber toolkits and so on, but it doesn't. It sort of feels from a distance pretty passive, like it exists and hope you can find it, and we'll tell you about it if you ask. But there's not a lot of proactivity to that. I wonder, Jacqui or Walkira, if you've got a view on that as well.
Yeah, you are right, Matt. That's how I seen things. That, for example, I don't know if people on here knows about the Federal Minister of Industry, Science and Technology. They give a grant of $2,000, about $2,000, for people to put cybersecurities, for small businesses to put cybersecurities in their companies. They just have to apply for it, but a lot of people don't even know that this exists. So as Matthew was saying, this lack of awareness is an issue. And as I was saying before, the fear of people about cyber, like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna get hit, but when is that gonna happen? And I start reading the 8 things I need to be doing, and then I don't know what patching means. And how do I get that to multi-factor authentication? And sometimes they put it like 2FA. what is that? You know, it just blows your mind away. So it's just not to be frightened and just to ask someone to help you out. You'll find even a kid probably who will know these things. So just don't be scared and do your best to get the awareness you need and talk to your employees, as I said before.
Yeah, I wonder whether, and Mike, I'd be interested, because I think this is something you're particularly passionate about, but I wonder whether the angle is not more around brand risk and business viability in the whole versus the technical part of it. You know, that the actual, you know, the risk of losing customer data or being shut down economic or otherwise for a period of time because of an attack. Is that a better route to get sort of this, to move the inertia? What do you think?
Yeah, you've probably heard Tony, the RMIT CISO, talk about this.
Yeah.
And he talks about, he's like, no, it's not cybersecurity, it's business continuity.
Yeah.
And recognizing that because a huge portion of doing business today is digital, that component is like as important today as the fact that I need a lawyer, I need an accountant. It has to be something that is basically in the P&L.
And do you think is that a better point of leverage? Like, you know, that your brand, your actual viability as a going concern is at risk. It isn't just about it's going to be inconvenient and we're going to have to turn off some computers and systems for a few days. It's actually the continuity of your enterprise is at risk. Is that one of the levers to sort of move the needle?
I think, yeah, for us, we started our R&D 3 years ago, but the introduction of things like privacy legislation that kind of intersects with cybersecurity, that GDPR, CCPA in the US, CDR in Australia, that's quantifying the risk for an organization. It's kind of turning this into a measurable liability, and that is definitely changing behavior and changing the openness or the importance, the prominence of the subject.
Jacqui, I wonder, is that something Cynch is seeing as well? That the sort of the brand risk, the enterprise itself risk versus just the technical having a greater impact when business owners are working with you through the boot camp or the health checks?
Definitely. Like, if you think about the nature of these small businesses, they're just up and running and every single customer is important to them. It's a very competitive market out there as well. And so just one little incident or downtime can really cost, customers to leave and go to a competitor and may not come back. So a lot of the time that reputation is very important. Yes. Yeah.
And if we think about the, moving back to where we started with COVID and the acceleration, every survey, every report from, consulting firms to government is showing the infusion or the catalytic acceleration of digital economy attributes. Like, what's the downside risk of that in terms of cyber resilience? Are we at risk of really breaking that whole sector of the economy if we don't get this right? Like, what do you think the long-term view is? Are we going to flick back to bricks and mortar retail and so on? Where does it land, and what does that mean for the security posture of that sector? Double whammy question. I'm going to throw it to you, Matt, because
I actually think that the biggest issue we're going to see with COVID is that everyone's gone through this digital transformation process, but because they did it quickly, as Mike said, they weren't following, security by design principles or privacy by design principles. A lot of it's been done ad hoc very quickly. And I think what you're going to find is actually in the COVID recovery, more security issues, because you're going to have a situation where businesses have this sort of transformation where they've implemented very quickly, and those security weaknesses and vulnerabilities are only going to become known over an extended period of time. And I think that's going to be the problem, is then how to bolt in security into systems that maybe were developed in an ad hoc, quick situation just because of the COVID circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. Jacqui, what are your thoughts on that? Is that have you seen business increase because of that rapid transformation, or where are you finding the gaps?
Yes, so there's what Matt just mentioned in terms of, there's that risk that, there are some gaps. People will really quickly putting through exceptions, saying, okay, well, I'm just going to put something in place because I really need to get my business up and running. And we will see that in the future. The thing that we are seeing an increase in as well is that, there's a lot more governance and compliance requirements now put on small businesses, especially in the critical infrastructure sectors where, maybe a third or fourth kind of supplier is a small business or a medium-sized business. And those security requirements are now being pushed onto those types of organizations. And we're seeing a lot more of these small businesses coming to us and saying, hey, we've been asked to comply with this, but we don't even know what it is. Can you please help us? And so we're seeing a lot more of that type of nature of questions and people asking for assistance on how to even start to comply with these standards.
There's an emerging discussion about that expansion of critical infrastructure, that we used to think about dams and power networks and so on. That the idea of democracy as critical infrastructure has also come through, particularly with US elections and so on. I wondered the views of you guys as a group about how broadly we can frame this discussion to really, again, move the needle on this awareness, this resilience issue.
Well, I'm happy to take first punt at this. I've spent a lot of time in the Baltic working with governments in the Baltic to see the impact of attacks on democracy and how they actually can occur. And I think you're right. When we talk about critical infrastructure, when we talk about a whole of country viewpoint of cybersecurity, the importance of our democracy has to be included as part of that criticality.
Yeah.
And just recently, the ASIO, they have they launched a campaign about the think before you link.
Yes.
They've noticed that even industry groups are now being targeted for social engineering and everything. So we have critical people within other ecosystems within our industry. So it's not just you working as a person that is being targeted. It's you as a family member or you doing something else in your life, which you could be a potential target. So
yeah, it's one of LinkedIn Learning's most popular courses is one on deepfakes and how to understand the potential of technology now to be much more accessible to create nefarious misinformation. And so even understanding that, again, pulling it back to our discussion about SMEs, understanding that can happen, is happening, will happen, and being able to identify it is really important. Look, thank you so much for the discussion, guys. I'm going to throw it back to Adina and Rach from the Tech23 team to run us through the Q&As that might have come through from the group. Really enjoyed everyone's thoughts, and I think there's a really rich vein of optimism there, that we are seeing things move in the right direction. We know that the elements that need to change around demystifying the complexity and so on. And I think these discussions are really critical to keeping us moving in that direction. So Rach, Adina, back to you guys.
Thanks so much, Matt. That was really interesting. While I'm going to just ask anyone to either, you can send Adina or I a secret question if you like, or you can throw them into the chat. I know there's been a few people share on the board. I'm interested, seeing I've got the floor, I'll ask a question that I'm interested in. To Matt Warren's point about communicating to what is a massive group. SMEs is this massive group. I'm just wondering, how currently does the industry communicate with SMEs? And is that through intermediaries or is it directly to them? Matt, I might send to you first. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly one of the ways communication occurs with SMEs is through trusted partners. So it's through the banks, it's through accountants, for instance. So it's professionals that an SME would have a trusted relationship with, and certainly in terms of the cybersecurity strategy, they're trying to reinforce where there are existing trusted relationships. The banks have tried to be very proactive in terms of providing information for SMEs who are their customers about cyber. So again, it's really from an SME perspective is who do you trust, where to get information from. And what's apparent is it may not be the Commonwealth government, it may be someone closer to them, such as their accountant, for instance. So it means if you're able to make accountants more cyber aware, they're able then to pass that information on directly to the SMEs that they're dealing with, because they're dealing with them on taxes, GST, other taxation issues. And it's all about those relationships of trust that I think are very important.
Well, Walkira, have you got a view on this? I suppose I was just wondering if the role of are the vendors coming to play in this space at all? I mean, because a lot of SMEs, are actually dealing with a lot of other tech providers who maybe have all that tech information and can speak the language. Is there any role for them, or how does the actual industry help with this challenge?
Well, I can give you the example of AustCyber. So, for example, we have nodes on a national level, and those nodes interact directly with companies, cyber companies, and small and medium enterprises. Just to give you an example, this year we did this event with the Canberra Business Chamber, in which we had some vendors who came in to the event and had a one-on-one with the small business owners, just explaining to them on different levels of experience. So we divided even with knowledge, like what's your knowledge on cyber? Do you have basic knowledge, a little bit more advanced, and we divided like that. And we do that on a national level. All of our nodes try to interact with the small medium enterprises and get put together, make that networking between these two type of industries, the cybers and the non-cyber businesses. That's at least the work that AustCyber is trying to do. We launched a program in Western Australia, which is called Cyber Test Me, in which businesses can come for free, and students from the universities or TAFEs who knows about cybersecurity will do a test to the companies and tell the business owners what they need, what they're lacking, what they're doing good. And we are trying to launch that on a national level now with all our nodes. So we are trying to bridge that gap, because we know it's out there, as you rightly said it, Rachel. But for the cybers, it's really hard because they are so busy, like how to get to the small business owners unless it's through their vendors.
I'm just seeing if anyone's got any more questions. Other than that, throw your hand up if you do have at this point. I might just thank the contributors. I'm just interested, I mean, this is a great challenge, and I suppose just to get some thoughts around the room on, if you could ask the universe for something at the moment to help, move towards solving this challenge, what would it be? What would it take? I might go to you first, Walkira. What do you think it would take for people to actually, for us to actually have SMEs be cyber resilient?
Oof.
Wave the magic wand. What would it be?
Okay, from the cyber business perspective or from the vendor's perspective?
Well, I think if it's a challenge for Australia, what's the sort of settings, or what needs to change for this actually to be this problem to be solved? Where do you think?
Cybersecurity by design, as Mike was saying, and for the government to take the leadership on that. We made a proposal on to the ACT government, I think it was this year, to protect the whole city, the whole state, through the internet, and that can be done. So I cannot tell you the result for that, but what I'm trying to say is, for me, if I use a magic wand, will be for the government to actually take the leadership responsibility and do what it needs to be done to protect the people that don't have the knowledge, the awareness, or the resources to do it by themselves.
And I think it's also about maybe making it accessible to these small businesses. You know, it's really expensive to, if they wanted to get somebody to come in, it's like $1,000 a day or something for a cybersecurity consultant. That's just not practical or feasible for a small business. Having something that, you know, helps them prioritize what their risks are in a cost-effective way, so they know what they need to do, can really, really help a lot of these small businesses, and making that accessible and kind of like a no-brainer that they should do it.
I love that idea. We keep playing around with like the magic wand piece, right? If you thought about, in my generation, safety houses, to get to a point that concept of a safety house, of a tick or a mark that said a business was where it had to be, where it should be, to demonstrate digital cybersecurity, I think that would be that's what's needed. We need to get to that ubiquity of an image, of a brand, of a demand from customers, suppliers, supply chains, so that changes behaviour across the community. This isn't a government problem. It isn't a small business owner problem. It isn't a large enterprise vendor problem. It's a societal problem. And so we have to approach it in that way. And so I keep thinking about that little safety house image, and everyone knew what that meant. Everyone knew what that represented and what it took. And I think we need to get to some level of that type of approach.
And we would talk in our industry, talk a lot about this, you know, safety belts. You know, before people didn't have them, and now they do it, and you don't think twice about actually putting
and that's this balance of regulation, culture, and behavior. And how do you get that balance, get that right? I agree.
There's an aspect that's kind of been touched upon with, I think, all of the answers, and that's trust. Who can I trust as a consumer? Who can I trust as a small business, picking vendors and picking platforms to work with? And when you're seeing government departments being hacked, you're seeing the biggest, the most well-resourced organizations getting falling victim. How do you know who to trust? And there is a whole range of new technologies that introduce verifiability into the equation, so that it's not just a matter of, hey, you know, we respect your privacy, we look after your data, here's our privacy policy, but you're not going to read. How do we verify that when I'm sharing this sensitive information with you, platform, to run my business, how can you show me that that's secure? How can you verify that? And that's, I think, going to play a large part in solving the trust problem.
Matt, Warren, did you have any final comment on that one?
Well, I think what's needed is time and resources, because really what you're talking about is changing culture and raising awareness, and it's simply something that can't happen in a day. It's a bit like, you know, Jacqui mentioned about the seat belt or the, you know, sun slap message. It takes time. Maybe it needs public awareness campaigns, you know, to make people actually more aware of what the issues are. And what we have with the 2020, you know, cyber security strategy is a starting point, but it really is the starting point, not the end point. And what we have to see is governments, not just its Commonwealth, but also at the state level, carry on that message continuously. It isn't something that's going to be with us just for 5 years. It's going to be with us, you know, for forever, because we're going to become more and more reliant and dependent on technology, and the technologies we become reliant and dependent on are going to become more and more sophisticated. So there's going to be more and more security and privacy issues.
Oh, that's very interesting. On that note, I'm going to wrap up the formal part of this circle and thank all of our contributors. We are going to invite people to stay on the line, though. I know I want to thank Ryan and Jeremy for posting some questions just then, of course, just as I was closing. But if you've got the time, please stay on now and we'll keep chatting around some of these issues. But for those that have to leave us, thank you so much. Thank you to our contributors for helping share their education, to share their expertise and to educate us a little bit more about this very deep challenge. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.